My mind goes to that of, it's been a good run, right?
Yeah.
Almost 21,000 hours. They figured it out. I don't know what I'm doing. And my weekend is ruined. That's not emotional mastery, right? I got triggered. I fell further than was necessary, and I just loitered and rolled around in it for the entire weekend.
Okay, Dean Miles, welcome back to another installment of the Coaches Commonplace podcast.
Brilliant, Miller. I look forward to these. They're fantastic. I love every second of it.
Me too. Well, Dean, let's jump in. I've said for a while that I want to tell more stories. I want to hear more stories. And I know everyone who's a coach has a story of their journey to coaching, how and why they came to this practice. I want to hear yours.
I used to be happy. I had a great job, a great career. I think it was like a Wednesday or Thursday evening, late. I usually go to bed around 8:30 p.m. So it was late for me. Good friend of mine was calling me. His name was Brian. Answer the phone thinking, must be an emergency. There's no reason, there's no way he's calling me this late in the evening. And he said, I need to coach you. And I was like, you need to what? He said, I'm taking this class. I'm getting certified as a coach. He's like, you know me, Dean, I procrastinate. I was supposed to have coached someone, recorded this thing. I knew you would answer the phone if I called you, and you did. So I need to coach you now. And brilliant, before that moment, I don't think I'd spent 30 seconds of my entire life ever thinking about coaching. That planted a seed. I just love that whole process of the types of questions he was asking me. Crawled back in bed. My wife was like, who is that? I was like, that was Brian. And I just got coached.
Wow.
And that intentionality of the conversation. All right. So that fast forward, that was like maybe June, July.
What year?
2006. Brian then called back up and said, hey, I'm working for this small coaching firm. Contract expanding. We think you would be great for it. You want to come work some of this with us. And so I had enough hours, vacation hours with Merck Pharmaceuticals. I double dipped for a while. So I would take a week off or 2 weeks off, and then I would go coach this gig. And what they told the client is that their coaches were certified or in the process of becoming certified. And so I signed up for a class. So therefore I was in the process of becoming certified. And it was the biggest thrill. So then fast forward, now it's October. I did that. Fast forward maybe about 4 more months. And I said to my wife, what do you think if I quit Merck and did this full time? And she's like, you should do it. I was like, baby, you answered way too fast. Like, we should argue about this. I mean, I had pension plan and 401k and company car. And I mean, I had all the perks as a senior executive at Merck Pharmaceuticals. And she just said like that, do it. And I was like, Melanie, she's like, what's the worst that will happen? We'll lose everything. We're healthy, we're smart, but Dean, you were built for this. We always knew that we were going to own a business. We just never knew that you would be the product. And so that's how I got into coaching. So quit Merck. My parents were upset. My grandparents cried. I'm not exaggerating there. They just didn't know what it was. I mean, coaching had been around for a long time, but in the flyover country, if you weren't high, Fortune 50 company on the East Coast, West Coast, most of us have never heard of this and thought it was accessible for the masses. So then I went and got certified through Coactive Coaching. So CPCC, ICF credentialed, continued on with that small firm for about 6 more months. And then late 2007, put out my own shingle and off we went. But that's how I got introduced and started. Crazy, risky thing to go do.
Yeah. You talk about your family not knowing what coaching was. I think that's still the case for a lot of people. Like, coaching is this thing that people don't understand. A lot of days I'm not sure. I understand. I have my own thoughts, right? But
Right.
what's your view of how, well, what I want to know first is, what was it that your wife saw that she really supported you? I mean, you mentioned, she said you always knew you'd own your own business, but
Yes.
yeah, that's not like the common response when in the face of so much
No.
uncertainty. What do you think
Yes.
it was about her and about you and coaching that she just saw that potential and supported you?
I appreciate that inquiry. And we've talked, it's been 17 years now. And as we reflected upon that, one, this was during the Hillary Care kind of a time period.
Uh-huh.
Healthcare was shifting quickly, and there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions that were happening within the big pharma. So I was seeing friends of mine getting laid off and not easily replacing their income. So that started some of the entrepreneurial side of what can I own, where I can go earn $1 and keep that dollar, as opposed to earning someone else $1 and keeping maybe a penny. That was one aspect of it. But then if I just go back to my earliest memories, of maybe junior high and high school, I was that friend that people would come to with, I'm struggling with something, or I'm thinking about suicide, or I need to have this difficult conversation with, a sibling, a loved one, a parent, a girlfriend, a boyfriend. There was something about me that attracted people to that. And I didn't know what that was or why that was. I just know it kept happening.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking back, I was doing it all wrong, bro. I was just giving advice. I figured it out way too fast. I really wasn't listening to them, and I solved their problems. To the point, coactive coaching's certification process, the first 6 months is just classwork. And then the last 6 months is practicum. You go find real paying clients, and then you send those in, and they have professors that will listen to these recordings. So Ron Renaud is a friend of mine now, doesn't know anything about me. He's a MCC coach out of New York City. And at this time I was still in Lafayette, Louisiana during the time working for Merck.
And explain, if you will, what MCC means. So I know that's... So
MCC is a master certified coach. So the ICF has 3 different levels. There's ACC, an associate certified coach. Then the next level, you have to show proficiencies in the number of paid hours, is a professional certified coach. And then at the highest level, I forget, you have to have over 3,000 hours, something like that.
I think it's 5.
Is that right?
I think
I'm coming 5, up on 21,000 hours, by the way.
Holy cow.
Isn't that unbelievable? Woo, I've got stories, both good and bad, theirs and mine. But I said, so this is a very good coach, is the point for Ron. He's master certified, and he's listening to my recorded phone call. Now, of course, I sent him my best one because had that type of an ego as a younger me. Still a little bit of that, but it was raging 20 years ago. And he says to me, Dean, were you in sales? I was in sales. Were you in pharmaceutical sales? Again, he knows nothing about me. Yes. And he's like, you're going to struggle with coaching. And I was like, I've already quit my job, dude. So thanks for the feedback, but what? Like, help me. He said, Dean, you've mastered the art of fake curiosity. He's like, you're quick. You figured out what you thought was their problem, and then you led them to your solution. That's not coaching. You're going to struggle here. Well, that's what I was doing junior high, high school, through college, even in my professional relationships as a salesperson. The office manager would pull me aside. The doctor would pull me aside, and we were having coaching type conversations, and I was doing it. Just really, really doing damage to them. Here's what you should do. Like, I don't have my own life figured out, but yet I'm going to tell them these different things. Coaching then gave me the tools to be a better coach. I had some natural ability. I just didn't know what I was doing.
I think that's probably a very common experience for people who feel called in this direction. They're the kind of person that people come to for whatever reason. And then they're just looking at, what is the training that will give me legitimacy or help me understand and develop my gifts, right? Like, that's actually one of the things I think is really cool, is that we all do have strengths and gifts and talents, and we're called in different directions. We might not know what that means,
Right.
for how we describe ourselves to other people, or the kind of degree we get, or even the job we take. I've seen that over and over again with people that are called to coaching. And that might be part of why I think it's not very well understood, because it is pretty different from becoming a therapist,
Right.
or a doctor, or some other kind of, consultant or something. Well, from that day years ago to, did you say 21,000 hours of coaching?
Yeah, I'm coming up on 21,000. Yeah, I still have my my tracker, my ICF tracker. So my first 10 years of coaching, roughly, probably a little less than 10 years, was coaching a lot of oil and gas clients, where I was 3 weeks of coaching and probably had about 200, 180 to just over 200 people I was coaching every month.
Wow.
Well, when you do that and you're doing 2 and 3 hour coaching sessions, those are long days, man. I mean, it'd be 4:30 in the morning, because everything was, we were coaching from the corporate. So this is companies like Precision Drilling, Patterson Oil, Chesapeake Energy. These are large global companies. We're coaching the C-suites, but we were going all the way down to the rig manager. So we would go, one of my weeks I would get in the truck with the superintendent, and like at 4:30 in the morning. And then we're driving rig to rig to rig throughout Texas, throughout the Panhandle, up in North Dakota, South Dakota, over in Pennsylvania, and those fracking plays. And I'd coach the rig manager, the driller assistant, the green hand, a safety person. And then I would coach that group, and would hop in the truck, and we would go till 9:00 at night.
Wow.
And this was 7 days a week.
So part of what seems maybe not unique, but different from a lot of people who I think are working to develop and establish themselves as coaches, is that you were inside not only an organization, like you were part of a coaching company providing coaching to another organization, where a lot of coaches are just starting out and they're just trying to figure out how to get a client.
Yes.
And then eventually, as you said, you left that. But I have a lot of questions I'm curious to know. One of them is this about, how did you open these conversations with these men and women? Because I know it's not uncommon, like if that's the kind of arrangement you have, that they think this is, it's forced on them, and some executive or higher up has made a decision.
That's right.
There's something wrong with me. I don't want to be here. Like, it's one thing to work with a client who sought you out, but when you're working with a client, they didn't ask for this necessarily. How did you open these conversations, and what patterns did you find as these 2-3, that's a long coaching session, but what patterns did you find as these hundreds of client sessions played out?
Yeah, great question. And man, I made some mistakes. Some of those early ones, said the wrong thing at the beginning, and really infuriated people, because they didn't choose me and they didn't choose the timing, and they were just guessing at what this cost, and they were right. And they're thinking all the other things money could have been spent on.
What kinds of things would you say? I've known you for a while. I don't see you as any kind of jerk, but what kinds of things would you say that would get people so riled up?
That initial contract, I was taking over for another coach. Right. So this person left, and then I came in, and I was like, and so I'm an ENFP. I'm a number 7 on Enneagram. It just means I'm a people person. I'm a campaigner. I'm a, hey, right now, not trust falls and weird stuff, but I like people, and I can be kind of loud. And so I sat down in the chair with, I'm here, new coach, we start fresh. I thought that was a good way of saying it. Vice president at Chesapeake Energy stood up, pounded on his desk. I am not effing starting over.
Wow.
You're telling me we're starting over? I've done all this work with this other coach, and I'm starting over? I mean, like, this was the straw that broke that camel's back. And he walked out. So I got on my phone. I called Brian, the guy we were talking about, and I was like, I think I just really messed up. Now what do I do?
Even coaches need coaching sometimes.
So he came back and I was like, here's what I meant by that. You aren't starting over. We're going to build off of all the work that you've done. I'm just saying if there's aspects that you didn't like there, I didn't say we're starting over. We're starting fresh.
Mm-hmm.
He got over it. It was just the wrong words on his worst day. But Brian, I tend to find a third of those clients, this is exactly what they've always hoped for. Mm-hmm. There was a third of them that were just, okay, I'm curious, probably going to be a waste of my time, but I'll play. And there was a third, their body language. I mean, and these are rough crowds, especially when you get out to these drilling rigs. Their BS meters are so strong. Mm-hmm. And they settle things behind the oil patch, right? I mean, they'll just go and kick your butt. And I said, all right, here's how it's going to be. I have to be here and you have to be here. So we don't have to coach. So what do you want to do? Because they realize, I mean, I'm here. I'm working for somebody else. I got to be here and you got to be here. So now what do you want to do? I said, the company will buy us lunch. You want to go grab lunch? And I just started with building a relationship. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them I was able to flip. So they didn't think I was coaching them, but I was absolutely coaching them through these conversations. And with time, you build trust. They start to see improvements. And then, when someone starts teasing you, then you know you're in there. And these contracts lasted for years. So you eventually get invited to weddings and bowling birthday parties and that type of stuff. It was very much like my DEA days of just how fast can you build that speed of trust. And there are coaches that are good at that. And there's coaches that aren't, to be able to just be steady with those that aren't ready yet.
Yeah. This to me is one of those things that was not obvious when I began coaching about developing rapport.
Yeah.
That is it's a thing. It's a real thing. Right. And that it's something, it is a skill. It's something that you can have an intention about. It's something you can organize your behaviors, your words and actions. And how do you define, or how do you think of rapport? What is it and why does it matter for a coach?
Well, the trust and the confidentiality, I really see that is my product. And without confidentiality and trust, this is going to be a conversation that will sound like any other conversation that they could possibly have throughout the day or throughout the week. Yeah. The coaching conversations should be distinctively different. They shouldn't be able to have this type of conversation really anywhere else, which means they have to trust me. So I start the coaching relationship with being vulnerable. And so I tell them, you need to trust me and you should not trust me. And that makes them like, why would you say that? I'm like, let me tell you my story. When I was at Merck Pharmaceuticals, I was #1 sales rep within our disease state. And so the company sent a consultant with me for that day to figure out how was I producing the results I was producing. 7 hours, fantastic conversations with this guy. He was out there in the field with me as we were meeting with some other reps. As I'm driving him to the airport, Brilliant, he says, so who or what got in the way? Like, what else could you have done had you not obstacles? And I hesitated, and he picked up on it. He was paying attention. And he's like, no, Dean, you can trust me. Anything you say in the car stays in the car. It just helps us produce a better program. I didn't obey my instinct, and I said it. And I didn't say anything wrong. It was just the wrong audience. Dropped him off. Before I could get back to my office, he already called my boss's boss's boss. And this stuff is rolling downhill fast. So I've been burned by it. And so I want that person that I'm coaching to know I've been burned by the person who says you can trust me. So my goal in this coaching session, you should never leave the coaching session with regret of, I wish I wouldn't have said that. So if you start talking and you're like, I don't like where this is going, just stop. And you're like, Dean, I don't want to talk about this. I'll high five you Now, if this topic keeps coming up, I might need to say to you, you need to trust me here because the same obstacles is there. We need to address this. But they always get to say yes, no, or renegotiate. By me starting with that story, they realize that I've sat where they're sitting.
Yeah.
And so don't have any regret. If I see you're uncomfortable, I'm going to change the topic because you shouldn't have regret.
Well, sometimes though, that point of discomfort is right. What's that saying? It's the edge of our comfort zone is where growth occurs. Right. It begins. And so that's interesting.
But not in the first session necessarily.
Sure. Yeah. First session while you're building a relationship and
right.
Figuring out the purpose and the roles and so forth. That makes sense. But over time, I think sometimes that's one of the hardest jobs we have as coaches is knowing when to be someone's cheerleader and when to kick him in the butt.
Yeah, so I design that. Brilliant. I tell them my experience is 1 out of every 3 coaching sessions, I'm going to aggravate the hell out of you. So that sets the expectation for them because then I'll even, it's not exactly every third. I'll try every single one, but I'll ask them, hey, are you in the mood today? Because I want to jerk your chain a little bit. And sometimes they say no, and I respect that. Because they've just had one of those days or one of those weeks, and that's just not what they need right now.
Yeah. Well, that's another huge thing too about asking permission, right? Like, first of all, being aware, being sensitive, and then asking permission before you start, challenging or pushing and so forth. Let me go back to the question I asked earlier about being inside an organization, inside a company. For people, for coaches who aren't in that place where they're out on their own,
yes,
in the wide world of social media, maybe they're doing some public speaking, maybe they're going to lunches and networking or the industry groups or whatever. And they're just looking to build their own client list up. What have you found is actually helpful? And what maybe, I'm going to stack questions here, but what works and what's a waste of time or what just isn't worth the effort in your view?
Yeah, a couple of things that now that I've got so many hours behind me. One, I got smarter in looking at industries and recession-resistant industries, because it seems like we're getting more of these economic flows because you need to get paid and to find so that's what we learned about oil and gas. So my first 2 years, built up all this clientele, but they were 100% with an oil and gas. And then late 2008, mid 2008, price of oil dropped from over $100 a barrel to like $39 a barrel. And we lost every contract we had.
Wow.
So were they the right clients? They were absolutely the right clients for us. But were they recession resistant? No, they were actually the complete opposite. So picking industries helps. So medicine, we picked School of Medicine within university systems, or surgeons. Those are good clients.
Are surgeons coachable?
If you can find them, they all need coaching. Are they all coachable? No.
That's like any group, right? And
right.
I understand surgeons are very competitive, very driven.
Yes. Right? Yes. And so that's where we kind of built on this idea, this quote, Samuel Johnson, that we need to be reminded more than we're instructed. So a lot of our language to the type A personalities that could afford coaching to the level that I wanted to charge, because I do have a mortgage I have to pay and kids in college and things like that, was finding language that made my coaching style accessible to the type A personality. Mm-hmm. So I'm not here to help you. I hear a lot of coaches say that. I'm not here to partner with you. A lot of the A personalities don't like that. I'm here to remind you of the things you already know that you're not fully maximizing. And for those God-like personalities that really need the most coaching, it works. Yeah. That language worked on them.
So that thing about identifying industries that you're basically targeting or you're developing business within.
Yes.
That's interesting. And then how do you do that? Do you send them personalized notes? Do you go to places where they gather? Do you ask for referrals and introductions? Like how, as a matter of actually developing business, how do you do that?
We picked the associations. So who's the decision maker for a surgeon? As a private practice or as a larger group, it's usually an administrator. And so there's things like SHRM. I'm sure many of you that are listening are familiar with this large HR type of association. We become very active in those, and we're looking for those subchapters of industries that are decision makers within groups that are recession resistant. So healthcare, finance. And it takes time. We go to those power lunches, we go to those morning breakfasts, and they get to know us, and and then we speak and we do keynotes at their events, and we don't charge very much for those, because that's not our business model. I'm not trying to make money doing keynotes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get access to the decision maker for the individual that can afford my coaching, that also need coaching because they have influence on our communities. So it's a win-win-win. But that's something, it took us a long time to figure all that out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had actually never considered this, but for people listening, maybe this is like a validation, or maybe it represents a kind of light bulb going on of a new possibility where, again, you're with your own company now, right? And I can see it behind you. Bridgepoint Coaching and Strategy Group. So you're with your own company and you have a partner or partners in it.
A partner.
And you're going to these events and you're seeking out decision makers who are looking for what you're offering, or at least they're open to it.
Yes.
And then at some point, there's an ask, right? You're building a relationship, identifying a need, and then you're making an ask. And that's interesting. When I say maybe a light bulb is going on, perhaps, people saying, hey, I'm either going to present my brand more as the group instead of me as the individual, or look to join one, or look to create one, partner with others, and so forth. Then I think there's some real power in that might transcend just the struggle of being a lone coach, out in the lonely world.
Right. That's exactly right. And we tried that. I mean, over 17 years, you try lots of things. But we tried the cold calls, and we tried the local Better Business Bureau, in those luncheons. We tried Rotary clubs. I really don't honestly think we ever got one client out of any of those. Might have been someone's friend's brother-in-law's cousin that we got of a thing, but had I not been that luncheon, still could have gotten that client. It wasn't until we got so niched to a larger organization of a specific industry push. And so I'm not going to give some of those out because we own it.
Yeah.
We have been the platinum sponsor for this particular association of administrators for 8 years now. And they're at every university in the United States. And we know all of them, and they know us.
That's awesome. Yeah,
it's
that's
fantastic.
great.
Like another one that we're not active with anymore, but there is the Mountain West, because it's dissolved. They got bought out by somebody else, but the Mountain West Credit Union Association. So they're based in Denver, Colorado. They represent 450 credit unions in Arizona, Colorado, and Wyoming. I got to know the program director, Dr. Dan Santangelo, and he did all the programs for these 450 credit unions. And I made myself available to Dan all the time, talking about leadership, talking about coaching. I would take him to lunch. So they launched a scholarship program for all 450 credit unions. Guess who they picked?
Awesome.
They could have picked anybody, but that was our strategy, is finding the one person who knows everybody with an association.
Yeah.
And it's paid off.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's not the kind of thing that a person can do in an afternoon, right? It's a commitment. There's a strategy there. There's a commitment,
years
and effort, sustained effort.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, thanks for sharing about your coaching journey and what's worked and a little bit about what hasn't. I love it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I don't often get to tell that story, so thanks for giving me a platform.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, Dean, I want to continue our conversation, exploring things related to coaching, things that will help coaches to be successful, to be effective. And I thought that a place that might be worth exploring is emotional mastery. And this, because it's something that our clients are, I don't want to say struggling with, but it's something our clients are facing, whether they're aware of it or not, right? It's something that every human faces. And I'm actually kind of geeked out by this idea that the more effective we are in managing our own emotions, managing and understanding and mastering our own emotional states, the more effective we'll be as a coach. Right. And the irony of a lot of that work is helping others to manage their own emotional states, right? So as I thought about this, well, and I want to ask you too, how do you think about, and again, I'm using this term emotional mastery, but how do you think about emotional mastery? What does that mean to you?
Well, your timing's impeccable. I'm on week 4 of an 8-week class called Creativity and Personal Mastery. So you've almost taken all the words by this professor, Dr. Srikumar Rao. And it's pushed me. The bar you just raised on all of us, brilliant, is mastery. So this isn't dabbling. This isn't just poking around with. This isn't just hoping you've got a couple good days strung together with a good run.
Yeah.
Mastery. Come on. Most of us are having to use caffeine and alcohol and pharmaceuticals to somewhat get this emotional state, just between the ditches. Mastery. A couple of things that Dr. Srikumar has made more clear in my mind when I think about emotional is the mental chatter that goes on in here. And just what kind of mental model am I running this chatter through? Is it scarcity or is it generosity? Is it victim or is it privilege? All those things interact with that chatter, which trigger me, and then the emotions flow. And so 2 things that I recently learned, I'm nearly constantly either role-playing what's going to happen, or I'm replaying what already happened around 2 distinct things to get my emotions flowing. I either felt embarrassed or I felt misunderstood. So I replay those a lot if I was embarrassed or misunderstood, or I role play a lot to avoid being misunderstood or to be embarrassed. I'm not even close to mastery, my friend.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have some awareness, and
I do,
and some significant measure of awareness. And I heard it said once that to be aware of limitation is to already be beyond it. Now, it's not literally true, but it's an interesting thought, right? Because you could be aware of something and still be tripped up by it or whatever. But what you're describing is that there's these emotions that recur for you, and in a way, they drive you regularly, right? And I think that's normal for all of us. I remember doing a program with Tony Robbins years ago where, as part of it, at the beginning, he asked us to write down what are the 10 emotions that you feel most intensely, most often. And there were 2 lists. It was the empowering emotions and the disempowering emotions. And so everybody does this. And he points out, he at one point in the seminar, he has us refer back to our list, and he points out that, well, first he asks us, how many of you actually found 10? And most people did not. And his point was, this is totally normal human experience. Most people tend to live within a limited range of emotion. right? And it is this,
Right.
it's whatever, it's frustration, it's disappointment, it's irritation. And then, yeah, there's the whatever, like there's happiness, joy, gratitude, those happen. But if you look at the percentages, and I think there's something to be said for awareness, there's a huge thing. I don't think that emotional mastery is possible in ignorance. So awareness, like many things in life, is, I think, a first step. And then also knowing what you want, right? Like, what is it that you want? But I also want to acknowledge here too, I think it's important to say that all emotions are normal and all emotions can be healthy, right? It's just the emotions that get in the way of us having the experience we want, being the person we want, creating and contributing what we want. So there's a time and a place for all of them. It's just the ones, if they recur and they're, I would say, problematic. But even the things that you're saying, this disappointment, the shame, for people, guilt, whatever, inadequacy, like there's a message in all of that. There's a time and a place for all of that. The real question then becomes, what do you do about it once it shows up? Right.
Yeah, because when I do get tripped up, I would fall further than necessary and I would lay at the bottom for a long time. So for instance, this happens. Late Friday afternoon, I'll get a text from a client. Hey, let's talk first thing Monday morning.
Like, are you really going to make me wait all weekend?
My mind immediately goes to sky's falling. We need to cancel cable immediately. Somebody call and cancel that order for pizza. Like, we need to turn off the lights right now. Like, seriously, I'm not even exaggerating. My mind goes to that of, it's been a good run, right? Yeah. Almost 21,000 hours. They figured it out. I don't know what I'm doing. And my weekend is ruined.
Wow.
So then Monday morning, client calls, super high spirits. They are. And I'm like, hey, I've been thinking about you all weekend. What's going on? No, I just knew I was going to have a half hour while I was waiting to get on this flight. And I just love talking to you because you kind of put me in the right state to go do this next. My God. That's not emotional mastery, right? I got triggered. I fell further than was necessary. And I just loitered and rolled around in it for the entire weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. And I think we all have versions of that, right? Like, I will share with you an experience I had recently where I was playing with Chat GPT.
Oh,
right?
I love this already. Yes, say
more.
Just
this amazing technology, right? And if you know me, you know that I'm a person who I've lived with depression for a long time. And especially if you looked at my music collection in high school, you'd be like, okay, this is
dark, maybe dark.
And then there's the whole thing of causation or correlation, how much of this music and these thought patterns are creating or just reinforcing, right? So at any rate, a lot of my journey over the last 10 plus years has been really, as best I can, cultivating awareness and then implementing practices that support me in not just avoiding depression, because again, I think feelings of depression, they have a message.
Yes.
There's a gift in those, but they're not very rewarding. They're not things that I want to dwell in. I don't want to fall into those and loiter in those. If there's a message I can get, like I love Ram Dass's statement, when you get the message, hang up the phone, right?
It's like a good country song.
Yeah. So nevertheless, here I am, and they recur. I'm thinking of a bit that Bill Burr, the comedian Bill Burr, did once about feelings of depression and utter hopelessness and even suicidality, which is not a funny thing, but comedy, I've heard comedy described as the angry art form, right? Yes. We can say things humorously, or comedians seem to have the ability to say things that we all think, but we don't say in polite company, right? But he does this thing where he's talking about having lived with depression, and even something will happen and it will take him right back to this place of suicidality. Like, I remember he's talking about baking a pie for Thanksgiving. He screws up the pie. Oh, I'll just kill myself.
Yeah.
Right. And it's scary how fast a mind can go wherever it goes of like, I got to turn off the lights. I got to cancel the pizza order because you see this stimulus.
Yes.
Right. And it takes you to a place, but then for others, especially who maybe have a history of depression or darkness, that they can go right back there. Right. So like I said, over the last 10 years plus, I've really been trying to understand and cultivate and learn to shift out of that when it doesn't serve me. Right. So here I am, day with a little bit of low energy, feeling a little bit down. And I type into Chat GPT, how can I kick feelings of depression for good? Like, how can I do this once and for all? Right. And it responds as it does in its concise, succinct manner, where it opens, combating depression can be a challenging journey, but it's possible to improve your mood and regain a sense of happiness and well-being. I love that it's assuring. So there it is, like setting a context, right? And then it goes on and it gives me these 7 things. And this is exactly to your point, Dean, that we more often need to be reminded than instructed.
Yes.
Right? Because everything it tells me, I already know, but more kind of dispiriting is I'm already doing. So it's like, I was hoping for that like 8th point that I just hadn't thought of yet. Right. Because here's the thing: exercise, practice good sleep hygiene, diet, connecting with others, seeking professional help. Right. And then therapy was the 7th. And like literally all of those I'm doing. And I'm like, shit, Right. And I didn't necessarily mean to turn this into a conversation about depression per se, but this idea that with coaching, with any endeavor, right? And this is another thing I heard Tony say in that same program I went to. He said, look, success in any endeavor is 20% skills and mechanics.
Right.
And it's 80% psychology. Like,
There's
it's not complicated what to do, but then managing your mental state to be able to organize yourself, your life, your internal constitution to go off and do that thing. That's a different matter.
I think I love this topic. And for those that are listening, primarily, we know our audience are up and coming or aspiring coaches. This is a real topic. I haven't seen the statistic here recently, or really haven't seen it since we were in COVID, emergency response COVID. But the suicide rate of coaches is nearing that of therapists. And what they think, right? It's put an asterisk here. This is hearsay of what I'm about to share. But it seems to be the final level of hopelessness for these coaches is this gap between the life that they coach about to the life that they're actually living. And the further away that gets, the more hopeless or imposter they feel, and then make the ultimate just terrible decision. And the same thing's happening to therapists and counselors. So I think this idea of emotional mastery within a space of being human, and that's why I chose those words carefully. My goal isn't to not trip. My goal isn't to not fall. My goal is to not fall further than necessary, and then to recover in a healthy fashion as soon as possible. As opposed to my own unconscious, not paying attention way, I'll fall further than necessary and just stay down there way too long. For me, that's what good looks like. And so full time for us at Bridgepoint is 2 weeks a month. So we're working a week and then we're off a week. And it puts us in a position to then bring our best selves back to these clients, where we can really serve them well. And we're also just modeling good mental hygiene. So we could all make more money if we worked 4 weeks a month. Well, most of us have already done that, and that's not us at our best selves.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks a month, have that week of recovery, go live life, go refill your buckets, and then come back to those clients just at the top of your game.
Yeah,
and
that's
spread,
awesome.
right? Spread it and show it and be generous with it.
That's awesome. And what you're talking about, you could work more, you could earn more money. When you show up each week, you won't probably be in your peak, form to best serve your clients or to enjoy life. Right.
Right.
And I love the way this was described I'm reading Wim Hof's book right now. And he talks about this, that many of us are driven to earn more, have more, right? By our cultural conditioning, bigger houses, nicer cars, more cars, whatever. And then he says, you can only drive one car at a time. You can only occupy one room at a time,
Right.
So it's not a matter of settling for anything, but I want to go here for a moment too, in response to what you're saying about not falling farther than necessary or staying there longer. I also just want to acknowledge this thing about having what I've heard. I love this term, unconditional positive regard. I think that was Carl Rogers that coined that, right? But offering unconditional positive regard to ourselves, no matter where we are, because I think we can compound a cycle of suffering if we go, oh, I shouldn't have fallen this far. I shouldn't have stayed here this far.
Yes.
For this long. Right. And I remember days many, many years ago now where I literally could not get out of a bed. It was like my body was fine. I was a healthy, like all outward appearances,
Right.
20 years old, could not get out of a bed, couldn't brush my teeth, shave. Like I don't even, looking back, it's still hard to understand. Like, I don't know what that was about. I don't even necessarily know how I got out of it. I mean, I'm fortunate. The first thing that comes to mind is very, very fortunate to have a loving family,
Yes.
who cared about me and so forth. But the point I'm just trying to make here is to have some compassion or acceptance for wherever we are. Right?
Yes. I like that a lot. And so Dr. Srikumar Rao, he teaches a lot of master and doctoral programs like at Cambridge. I think that's right. Or Columbia. Dr. Rao, I apologize if those are the wrong institutions. But higher education, Ivy League type institutions as well. Not sure why that was important to say all that. So let me get to the point of what Dr. Rao says. He was reminding us of the story of the second arrow. And I think it's a Buddhism-based story where a father was talking to his son. I have a client who makes arrows. So they make these little pens of arrows. I just happen to have them nearby for my illustration. Is that you'll get shot in an arrow. So the father asked the kid, the son, if you get hit with an arrow, does that cause pain? Yes, father, it causes pain. If you got shot with a second arrow in the same location, will that hurt as much or more? It would. The first arrow was pain, and the second arrow was suffering. The first one was shot at you. This one you self-inflicted. And so the principle is avoid the second arrow.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to master. This is supposed to hurt, right? Which is why I think the emotions is there. It's okay to experience pain. I think if you're not experiencing pain, it's a whole different conversation. This should hurt really, really bad. You should have regret. You should think about the actions you just took. But then to keep replaying it, which is I'm really good at, over and over, and I wish I would have, or if only I would have done this, or why me? God.
Yeah.
That's not pain anymore. That's suffering.
That's right. And with this too, I think about how some of this conversation about like cultivating emotional mastery can be a little bit like saying, well, how do you win a basketball game? Well, you just score more points than the other team. Oh, okay.
That's all you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I saw this thing on Instagram. The next time you're feeling depressed, try not feeling depressed instead. Right. It's like, oh, okay. I got it. Thanks.
Yeah. That's helpful.
And that's where then, as I've looked at this, achieving, like what it really means, how to do it. What are the, as I've heard it said, the levers and dials? What are the things that we can do that will actually make a difference? And I feel a little bit reluctant right now, even kind of sharing this as a sort of lesson, right? But
Yes.
something that I found incredibly powerful. Two things. One is a commitment, right? It's like making a decision or being committed to something, how powerful that can be. And I'll give you one example that is along the lines for me of emotional mastery is I have made a commitment to no longer complain or no longer gossip. I've written it down. I review it at least once a week. That's a commitment I have. Dean, every day I find myself wanting to. Sometimes I find myself in the midst of a complaint or in the midst of sharing something that I heard about another person. And to me, I know that's gossip, right?
Right.
But that power of the commitment, like my life is different because of it. And that's one thing. And I think that it's easy to go through life without even knowing what we're truly committed to. So the power of language to actually write that down, put it somewhere that we remind ourselves, that alone, I think can be transformational, right? So that's one thing. And that commitment, I mean, we all get to find those for ourselves, right? Like it's probably not, don't feel depressed anymore, right? Maybe that would work for somebody, but at any rate, number one. And the other thing, this was something Dean, I think I was on this planet for more than like 40 years before it was pointed out to me that our attention is always somewhere, like a laser beam. As long as we're awake, as we're in at least like consensus consciousness, ordinary states of consciousness, like
yes,
our attention is somewhere. But this is where mindfulness comes in, being aware of where our attention is. Because the way we feel, the emotions that seem to spontaneously arise within us are absolutely a factor of where our focus is, where our attention is. Now, it's not to say we just ignore the unpleasant things in life. It's not just a matter of ignoring, but there is something powerful in being conscious about where you're putting your attention. So that's one thing.
Yes. Impossible. It's possible to do that. So the last 3 weeks, part of Dr. Shukramar's class is I'm having to keep a log, right? So I've got a timer that goes off and it's capturing the awareness. And if I could find what was a trigger that kind of put me into that state, that's fantastic. But it's just starting with that awareness. At first, I didn't think it would be possible to be as aware as I have now become. But it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. With a commitment or an intention and with some effort. And it really is like a muscle. It really is something we can build, right? This awareness. And then another thing, and this model, was pointed out to me by Tony again, Tony Robbins, about not just focus, that's a starting point, but then also our language, because there's always a language pattern as a human being, conscious or unconscious, right? Vocal or subvocal, that you say it out loud or you keep it to yourself, that we're meaning-making machines going through life, judging, evaluating, comparing, analyzing, assessing, and how often we just let whatever, that little narrator inside our head say whatever it's saying without a conscious generation of language and meaning. And that alone, those go hand in hand, of course, what you're focusing on and then what you make it mean. But those two things, and this can be, as I'm saying this, I'm also present to how exhausting this can be. It's like, oh, are you saying from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, you're asking me to be aware of where my attention is and what the meaning is I'm assigning to every interaction I have, to every event that happens, to all the occurrences in my life? And it's like, you are talking about the quality of your life here.
Yes. Now, I think some people brilliant by personality, just by randomness of personality. There are some people that I've met them, they don't require that level of effort because on their worst day, when they're tired, when they're not paying attention, they're patient and they're kind and they're generous and they're I mean, I've met those people.
Sure.
And then there's the rest of us.
And then there's the mortals, right?
Yes, that it does require effort. There are those that just if they're not paying attention, they're impatient.
Yeah.
If they're not paying attention, they're selfish.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of a statement Yogananda said about a saint is merely a sinner who never quit trying.
Yeah.
But then the last part of this with emotional mastery, again, from the Tony Robbins model. And I think this is really profound. And again, not obvious, even though it's right in front of us, is our physiology, is what we're doing with our body, right? In every moment, in every regard, from how rested you are, to how hydrated you are, to what your breathing pattern is, to what your posture is, to how you're moving your body. Like everything that has to do with your body is going to have an impact on your emotions. And it's this reciprocal effect that what you do generates an emotion, and the emotion tends to, encourage you to do something else. And as you mentioned earlier, we're often, especially I think in our society, reaching for caffeine or alcohol or tobacco or a news feed or video game or more work, that we're constantly doing that. And again, that's normal, that we're pretty much always looking to shift our state, our emotion in some way, to avoid a painful one or to find a pleasant one, which are just two sides of a coin. But here's the thing, is that there are some behaviors, there are some patterns, some habits, as we know, that have a cost, right? They'll lead to an outcome, A, and B, they have a cost to our life, to how long we live, to how vital we feel, to the quality of our relationships like this. So to me, this real work is, what are the habits and the patterns that I can cultivate and implement into my life that will help me be, do, and have, what I want without paying any unnecessary costs, right? And that's all I get as I have this conversation. This can be pretty conceptual, but there's also a part of this that's very real. Like we can live this experience. The challenge is A, remembering it, like you say, how can I be reminded? And B is finding out what those unique things are for each of us. Like what serves me to focus on, what serves me to avoid focusing on. What are the language patterns that are really kind of screwing me up? What are the ones that are going to serve me? And then what are the things with my body that I'm either not doing or I am doing? And it's like in a way, it's like a game, or a science experiment that if we're willing to take it on with curiosity, and a little bit of verve, a little bit of, playfulness.
If I were to represent all the skeptics, because the majority of my life I've been a skeptic of this level of cause and effect, of come on, brilliant. Listen, right? Your beard's gotten too long. You've gotten all foo-foo. You've gotten all, cerebral on us. That used to be the mental model I would use for this, of like, that's cute, right? That's cute for those that want to spend so much time on this. And then I made a mistake 2 years ago of getting this. I may have talked about this on one of the other podcasts, this Oura ring, OURA ring, RING.com. And this thing measures all kinds of biometrics. And one of the things it'll give a push notification, it'll tell me to do like a mindfulness moment, to do this 7-minute breathing exercise, which I think is probably a nice thing to do, but whatever, right? What a waste of time. I could go do something else for 7 minutes. And so I would fake it. So I would tell the app that I did it and didn't do it to see if I could get a placebo effect or if they would just give me the credit for it. And it didn't. There were other times that I didn't tell it that I did it, and I would do the breathing for 7 minutes. And its impact on my overall well-being, measurable well-being, stress levels, heart rate variability, overall restfulness, restorative process for the brain, that doesn't feel equal. That a 7-minute breathing exercise should have that level of impact on my overall well-being in a 24-hour time period. which is why the skeptic in me was like, there's no way. There's no way.
Yeah.
Well, I've had it for 2.5 years now. And I'm telling you, it's the best 7 minutes I can spend. Now you do 7 minutes of that. You do the hydration. You have a go to bed routine. You have a wake up routine. You've got walk, right? Which is you're very consistent with. We so underestimate the impact of this on our emotional well-being. And that was me my whole life.
Yeah.
I thought the whole thing was snake oil.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the challenges of this is being inside ourselves. Just like when we're intoxicated, we're not always the best judge of how intoxicated we are. Like when we're in an emotional state.
Right. Right.
It's not always as evident to us, nor do we know what benefit is available. Right. And you talk about 7 minutes of breathing, and that's a gift if you can give yourself that in the 1,440 minutes of a day, minus the, however many 480 you spend sleeping if you're lucky or whatever. So you got like 1,000 minutes awake.
Right.
7. That's amazing. One of the things I've discovered, you probably have too, is even literally 30 seconds, even a minute of conscious breathing can just be a huge shift. But one other thing on this before we move away from this topic of emotional mastery, which really could also be awareness, right? I think awareness is the foundation of mastery. Is for coaches. I say this a lot, that anything that helps you be a better version of yourself will help you be a better coach. So no surprise that this is, and emotions can be their own reward, right? If we're looking for a way to improve the quality of our life, it's probably not going to come from another car or even another vacation or another spouse, probably, right? But it's not another relationship,
right?
So it's not in a thing. It's not even in any individual experience that we would go book and do, but in the moment-to-moment living of our lives. And emotion can be, in that regard, its own reward to deepen the quality of our lives. But B, for coaches, I think there's an even greater imperative, right? Because again, this is what our clients are faced with as well. And it doesn't mean we need to necessarily like teach them the model, although sometimes maybe we do get out the whiteboard marker and so forth. But being able to ask questions along these lines about when you see someone who's triggered or you see a habit that's not serving them. And especially if you do subscribe to the idea that I do, that all human behavior is a series of patterns. And you can start to identify these things and help a client to become aware of them, understand the costs and benefits, the alternatives that are available. Now, by understanding and living these principles of emotional mastery yourself, not only are you able to show up and be more effective and reap the reward of that, but then to help your client. And it's like, I realize I might sound a little dramatic here, but I think that's a sacred privilege, to be in that position.
I would agree. And to have been in that position and to not have a well that is full to be able to then make a difference. What a wasted moment.
Yeah.
And so if I think about, again, for our listeners, aspiring coaches or coaches that are trying to go into the next phase of becoming a better coach, a great coach, and getting paid, right? Getting paid more. Your life needs to be authentic. And you need to be living a life that's worthy of someone else to admire. And I mean that in all the best ways. Like for me to go to a health physician who's unhealthy themselves, I struggle with that. I understand they've got a lot of things here, but for me, there's just something that's not aligned there. Yeah. I prefer a physician who's living out what their expectations and counsel are for me.
Right.
I become a better coach and I get paid more because I'm living a life that's aligned with what I'm coaching to.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you're perfect.
No,
right?
My God, no.
It doesn't mean your life doesn't have problems.
Right.
But there's something to be said for being congruent with yourself.
Right.
So yeah, awesome. Well, Dean, I know we've gone about as long as we had said we wanted to.
Yes.
Before we wrap, though, I want to talk with you a little bit about client selection. You just mentioned, for coaches. So here we've talked about your coaching journey. We've talked about something that can help coaches be more effective in emotional mastery. Before we wrap, I'd love to just explore this, something that can also help clients be more successful, and it can help them earn more money in client selection. This is something you and I hear our mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, talk about a lot.
Yes.
And when we start, we often don't know who our client is. Like, anyone who will hire me, anyone
right.
who will let me practice with them.
That was my litmus test for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's really actually good advice when we're starting, is like, coach anyone and everyone
right.
to gain the experience, right? To maybe you'll build some referrals. Maybe you'll get testimonials like from people or endorsements. But then also we'll get clear, like, oh, I like this kind of person. I like a person, and maybe it's the kind of work they do. Maybe it's their psychographics. It's the way they see the world, the kinds of things they believe or they're interested in, right? But what have you seen and we did talk about client selection some earlier in this conversation, but why, in your view, why is client selection such an important thing for coaches to actually think about?
Well, one, it's just a good business practice. I mean, if you're doing this as a hobby, maybe it doesn't matter as much. If you're doing this as a profession, as a way to pay your bills, then I think it's probably the most important thing you're going to spend time on is your ability to, one, articulate who this right person is for you. Because a couple of things happen that I've learned, Brilliant. The more clearly I can articulate it to myself, the more clearly those that know me can articulate to other people that may be looking for me. And so if I can't describe what I'm looking for, then my friends and my network also can't tell people what Dean's good at.
Yeah.
My ideal client is looking to slow down. They're looking to prioritize, and they want to smile again. And that took me a long time to figure all that out. That's my ideal client. Of course, I have a lot of clients that don't fit all of those, but that's my ideal client.
Yeah.
They want to slow down. They want to prioritize, and they want to smile again. Because I can articulate that. My network can articulate that. So if they hear an executive say, my life is so out of control, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overstressed, my priorities, personal, professional, are just not there. My team is doing some amazing things, but we're not on the same page. And my wife says, I'm unhappy. If they hear any level of that, my network says, I know the coach for you. He's good at that. But it took me a long time to finally figure that out, right? And to get these types of language things of remember to smile. Yeah. What about you? What have you learned over the years?
Well, I think a lot about what Marshall says, that client selection is the number one factor in coaching success. It's like, that's really interesting. And then I look at Marshall's list of clients.
Right. Right.
And we don't necessarily know which was first, the chicken or the egg. Like, was Marshall a great coach and then he attracted a bunch of good clients? That's what it would seem to be, because that seems to be
Agreed.
The pattern of life, is like, oh, you're really good in sports, and then you perform well in college, and then you make it to the MD. It's like you go up some ladder, right? Or you start in your hometown, and then maybe you go regionally in whatever you're doing, right? And then you arrive at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. And it's easy to think that that was Marshall's approach, and probably some of that was true. He started somewhere too. But as I've heard him talk about this, he's been very deliberate in who he chose to have as a client. And that, I think, has made a huge difference. And not to say that we all need to pick, the top leaders at the world's top businesses and organizations.
Right.
But I think there is value in thinking deeply about who it is we want to serve, what kinds of problems we want to help them overcome, the way they think and see the world. And if nothing else, how, like, the kind of person that we want to spend our time with.
Yes.
Right. Because I contend this is one of the great things about coaching is that, to a large degree, like in a way that, especially if you work in a lot of other industries, you don't necessarily get to choose your clients. You're happy to have a client, and you're taking whoever comes in the door, whoever submits that info form on your website or whatever. Right.
Yes.
But with coaching, you have the privilege of being able to be selective. And that helps to do that at the outset, not just, after the fact.
Yeah, I would say as soon as you can.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are seasons where you can't. But as soon as you can, or when you can, you need to be able to articulate who your ideal client is. So there's those three. That's more on the personal side. On the corporate side, I'm looking for those individuals that live out a life of adventure, advocacy, and awe, my core values. I tend to attract ENTPs or ENFPs, or number 7s on Enneagrams. I also tend to attract the opposite, the INTJs, because they're curious about how I'm not you, but how do I bring that as a leader so that I can inspire and connect? There's also this idea of where strategy, execution, and mood hit the bottom line. So this has to be about results, but it also has to be about people. And so if that's your organization, I know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And thinking about, too, again, the results, the results that you can help people deliver, right? This is a little bit of a misunderstanding with coaching, right? It's still 100% that client's responsibility to deliver those. You can just help them get out of their own way, so to speak, or gain clarity. They can
accelerate it, what we'll say. You can accelerate the experience. Yeah,
absolutely. And understanding, the kinds of problems that they're facing, or the reality of their situation. And I'll give you one example that comes up for me when I think about this a lot is, I think of a coach and an author and a speaker, Cameron Herold. He's popularized this idea of creating a vivid vision, articulating something in words as like a painting of the future and so forth, which is powerful. Right. Yes. Right. But he wrote a book that, and I think his whole practice, unless he shifted away, is for the number 2 in an organization, right? Because that's a unique place.
Yes.
Not to be the CEO, but whether you're the COO or you're, somehow otherwise like the right-hand person. And that's pretty interesting, because I think that gives him a marketing advantage over, I coach executives. Right. Or even I coach executives in a certain area, but I get what it's like in issues of succession or whatever. And he can speak to them not only in a coaching session, but in a marketing way.
Yes.
In terms that they'll understand and resonate with and respond to. I think that's
and
really
you
powerful.
Remember it. And if you ever heard a client or just somebody at the golf course, at the airport, saying, this is my reality, or I'm looking for a coach who can coach someone in this reality, you immediately think of him.
That's right.
That's amazing.
I'm looking up his website right now to see his books. Yeah, I'm when I Googled Cameron Herold, he is the COO Whisperer. He is the founder of the COO Alliance and the Second in Command podcast. Right. And there's many people who are in that place, and they are looking for, his book. He's written a book called The Second in Command. Right.
See, it's so smart. Another guy who you and I know who's in the 100 Coaches community, his name is Mitchell Levy. His thing is around credibility. He calls it cred dust. He said, your ability to articulate what you do in 7 words or less, these are my words now, but is tied in with your level of credibility.
Yeah.
If you can say what you do in 7 words or less, it increases your perceived credibility score. I think that was really good. Yeah.
I remember hearing Marshall talk about that. I help successful people. It's something very close to, I help successful people achieve lasting behavioral change.
Yes.
It's like, oh, okay. If you're a person that sees yourself as a successful person and you have something you want to change and you're in the way you show up for other people and the things you do, I want
Right.
that. You're like, boom, I
Right.
understand it. I want it. That's powerful.
Yeah. It's so good. Oftentimes when I meet new coaches, because I was in the same place when the person ahead of me asked me the question, so who's your ideal client? I don't know. I'm still working on that. I get that. You need to spend more time there because this matters.
Yeah.
Every minute you waste on that is, I think, a client it's not gonna find you.
Yep. Yeah. And then of course, we write it down. That becomes our control, so to speak. We can compare reality against that. We can refine it. We can refine it anytime.
Of course.
Erase it and start over. But to have that. And I love what Buckminster Fuller said, clarity is power. So having this clarity can help us in so many ways.
Yeah. Sam Walton said about, founder of Walmart, until it's clear on the inside, it'll never be clear on the outside.
Yeah.
They're just obvious statements.
Right.
But yet we stay in this unclear position for a long time.
That's right. Well, Dean, as we wrap up, what blessing, encouragement, instruction, challenge will you leave people listening with?
Avoid the second arrow. That's the language we've been using since I've been reminded at the house. If my wife hears me complaining, replaying, role playing, she'll say, hey, watch that second arrow. And it's just a great reminder. My daughter's a junior in college and she was going down some gossip replay train of where she was hurt by something. I was like, second arrow. She goes, that is the second arrow. And then we just moved on, right? It was really, really fantastic. So that's what I like to remind everybody. Avoid the second arrow if at all possible.
Awesome. All right. Ironically, perhaps I will second that.
Hey, nice work.
Avoid the second arrow. Okay. And maybe extend it by helping your clients avoid the second arrow, helping them become aware of when they're doing it, aware of the consequences of doing it, and aware of an alternative possibility. So,
such good emotional mastery.
There we go. All right, Dean. Well, another Coaches Commonplace episode in the books. Thank you for making time. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you here in Zoom land.
Yes, I enjoy it. Always good to remember wins with Brilliant Miller.
Yes. All right. Until next time.